Hey, what's up guys? In this video we'll be creating this simple yet eye-catching visual. So without wasting time, let's go. Welcome to the channel guys. So in this episode we'll be creating a visual almost similar to one I've done before, and they're all billboards. So let's jump into it. First things first, I already placed the sky, but I wanted to replace the water body at the bottom since we don't need it. So to do that, I added a new road layer already cropped out. Let me show you. So I cropped out the city and the sky since I was only interested in covering the water body at the bottom. So ensure the water body is cropped out, is covered by the road. Then we'll go ahead and do the color grading. So to do that, I'll use the gradient technique. So just click on the adjustments, then go to gradient. Okay, pick the first options that pops when you choose the basic gradient, then play around with the angles. So I wanted the brightest area to be in the top right, top left, then the dark areas to be at the bottom right. Okay, just move it around until you settle on what you want. Then for this artwork I wanted it to be warm, so as you can see on my top right, I've picked up 4 colors, yellows and oranges. So I'll just add points on the gradient, then use the color picker to choose the colors on the swatch. So just ensure they're not too close to each other. You can pick as many colors as you want. Okay, just click OK, then change the blending mode from normal to color. Also ensure it's clipped to the road layer, then reduce the opacity, then increase it gradually. So this gradient layer is done. We'll use to color grade all the other elements in the composition. So we are going to duplicate it quite a number of times. So to sharpen the road, just duplicate the road layer, then drag it on top of the gradient. Ensure it's clipped. To know it's clipped, just look at the icon. So there's an icon that pops. Drag the contrast all the way to the left. Okay, that's before. Okay, so drag the contrast all the way to the left or 0, then click on the duplicate layer, go to filter, other, high pass. So for this effect we are going to use the slider and settle on the area where the texture starts to reveal. Then click OK, change the blending mode from normal to linear light. So you can see the sharpness increases, but we just want it to be subtle, so decrease the opacity. Then yeah, so that's the before, that's the after. Okay, so we are going to duplicate the gradient layer and use it on the sky. So hold Alt or Command on Mac and drag the layer on top of the sky and ensure it's clipped to the sky. So it gives it that tint, orange tint. So we'll add a curves layer, then ensure it's clipped to the sky, then drag the midtone slightly down. As you can see, it darkens the sky. We are going to click on the layer mask and hit Ctrl I to invert, then press B or select the brush tool and ensure you're using the soft brush tool. Okay, so reduce the opacity, then ensure the foreground color is white white reveals, black conceals. So we want to reveal, so just brush over the top layer to add that, to make the upper sky darker. So we'll repeat the same process for the bottom, but this time we'll make it brighter. So to do that, go to curves. This time we'll pull the curves upwards, not downwards. As you can see, it brightens the sky. Control I, ensure white is the foreground color, reduce the flow, then brush over the bottom to reveal the brightness. So normally the horizon on skies is usually the brightest, and as you move further from the horizon, the sky gets darker. So yeah, that's the whole thing I'm trying to create in this artwork. Once you're satisfied, just go ahead and click the hue and saturation, then play around with the saturation. But to me, this sky already looks good since I wanted that yellow tinge. If you want to change, you can just pick the color picker and choose the point where you want to change. So in this case, it's cyan. Just play around with the hue. I think this looks good, so we will skip the next step. Okay, so I'll go ahead and add the building layers. Hold on, there was a bad layer, but we'll edit that later, so skip the bad layer. For now, I'll unhide the building layer, the India gate, which is on the right. So guys, always take your time when cropping out. So this is the before. Always take your time when cropping your images, and if you have a hard time doing it, you can always watch tutorials. There are plenty of them out there. So just take your time to crop out your images if you want good final results. So yeah, I cropped out the India gate, as you can see, but I'll go ahead and unhide one more layer. So I placed a businessman behind the building. Yeah, so that's the before. That's before. And that's the after cropping. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and edit the building on the right. So we'll start by color grading. So hold Alt or Command, then drag the gradient layer to duplicate it and place it on top of the building. Clip it. Then since the building was already had a warm colors will reduce the opacity almost to 0. So just increase it gradually. Yeah, it already matches the sky and the road, so we'll leave it at that and go ahead and sharpen. So Control J to duplicate the building layer, then drag one layer on top. Brightness, clip it, then reduce the contrast all to 0, then go to filter, other high pass. We leave the previous details, settings, and click OK. Ensure the blending mode is linear light. So unless you want your images to be too crispy, always remember to reduce the opacity. Okay, so normally I take it all the way, opacity all the way to 0, then increase it gradually. Good. So to edit, I wanted to edit the trees over there. So to do that, just to edit a specific color, just click on the color picker. So the yellows, then play around with the saturation. So we'll go ahead and edit the business guy on the right behind the building. So I drag the gradient layer. So we'll just zoom in and use his face for reference, then play around with the opacity. So always remember to reduce the opacity, never leave it at 100%. Just zooming in and out to see if the color matches that of his surroundings. So we'll sharpen the image, Ctrl J to duplicate, contrast all the way to 0, then click the duplicate, filter, other, high pass. Okay, then change to linear light. Again, just zoom in and use his face as reference, then play around with the opacity. You might, if this process is tedious, you can always sharpen the images that you want to focus on. So the sky can be left out, images that are far back there can be left out. Always sharpen the areas where the audience is supposed to focus on. So in this case, it's going to be the buildings and the businessmen. So I'm going to go ahead and do some dodge and burn. So to do this, create a curves adjustment layer, drag the midtones all the way, not all the way, slightly up. Ensure white is the foreground color if the layer mask is black and you're using a soft brush tool. So white as the foreground color, then brush over the areas where light falls on the businessman. Also ensure flow is around close to 0%. So in this case, I played with 1 to 5%. We're just doing some retouching to add extra detail. So the folds, basically what we are doing, we are making the highlights brighter. So the folds and areas that directly face the sun or the source of light. That's before and that's the after. We'll add more details on his fingers. And also his face, some parts of his face. That looks good, so we'll skip to the next layer. Alright, so next is going to be the building on the left, so I'll just unhide it. As you can see, the rod I added previously at the bottom helps us hide any unnecessary objects in the images we are going to use. So just place it and make sure the areas you need are on top of the rod. So it's already cropped out as you've seen. Then same process, Alt or Command on mark on the gradient layer, then drag it on top of the building. Ensure it's clipped. So ensure it's clipped, then You can just zoom out to make sure it matches the surrounding, then play around with the opacity. As you can see, the composition already looks good. So I'm going to add an artificial sun at the center. So I'm going to add a levels layer on the building on the left. But first I'll increase the sharpness, ensure it's clipped, contrast all the way to 0, then go to filter, other, high pass. So as I was saying, I'm going to add an artificial sunlight at the center. So that means the right side of the building on the right is going to be brighter than the areas on the left. So to create that illusion, I'll go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer. So go to adjustments, levels, ensure it's clipped to the building on the left, then drag the lightness to the right. Okay, so to hide, we want the right areas on the building to be bright. So I'll click on the gradient tool, pick the middle option where just delete that. So we are going to choose black. So black conceals, and we want to conceal the levels on the right side. So I'll just drag from right to left, just like so. Okay, so I'll add an artificial sunlight and an artificial sun at the right. So the building on the left side of the building will be brighter. So I'll manually go ahead and conceal the levels. So just make sure the left side is brighter than the right side. No, the right side is brighter than the left side. Okay, so yeah, that looks good. I went ahead and added some trees. So this almost adds to the aesthetics, but also hides the unnecessary objects in the artwork. So we'll go ahead and match it with the other trees. So this the curves. I dragged all the midtones all the way, not all the way down, slightly down. Then it's too green, so I'll change the color grade. Create a new hue and saturation layer and drag the hue to the left to make it more yellow. So I'm trying to match it to the trees at the back there. I'll add another tree on the right building. So I'll show you a technique. Create an empty layer, new empty layer, then go to filter, render, and Photoshop has presets, renders. So click on trees, then you can choose the type of tree you want to place on your image. Tons of options to work with here. Adding leaves, branches. Okay, so in this scenario, we want the bright areas to be on the left of the tree. So ensure the light source is on the left. Okay, I think this looks good. Also, there are tons of trees to choose from, but we'll go with this. Click OK. Then resize the image and place it where you want it. As you can see, it's too green, but we'll change it. We'll color grade it later. So just reduce the size and drag it to the right. Also it's too bright, so we'll create a curves adjustment layer, then drag the midtones down. Okay, drag the hue to give it some yellow and show it's clipped. Drag it to the left to give it some yellows. So in this scenario, the sunlight, the light source is from the left, so the left side of the tree is supposed to be brighter than the right side of the tree. So to do this, we'll go ahead and create a new curves, then drag the midtones up. Okay, Control I to invert the layer mask, ensure white is the foreground color, then brush over the left side of the tree. So that's done. We'll go ahead and unlock onto the next level. So the businessman on the left. So unlike the guy on the right, the one on the left is in front of the building. So we are going to replicate the shadow on the original image on the cropped out image, but we'll deal with that later. Yeah. So I'm just going to zoom over his beards over here just to show you the clarity of good cropping. So take your time and cropping out the images if you want the final result to be perfect. So we'll just go over the same process we've done on the other layers. Alt or Command the gradient, clip it, and try as much as you can to match the colors on the guy to his surroundings. What we're doing now is the sharpening. Duplicate contrast all the way to 0, high pass, click OK, then change the blending mode to linear light. So luckily for us, this image, the highlights and the shadows are well outlined, so we won't be doing so much dodge and burn. So after we sharpen the image, it now looks crispy. Just play around with the opacity, then we'll jump into the next step. So to add the highlights, just click on the original layer, then add a curves adjustment. Then drag the midtones slightly up in the graph. Then Control I on the layer mask to invert. Ensure white is the foreground color, the soft brush is selected. Take the flow all the way to 1 to 5%, then brush over the areas exposed to direct sunlight. But since it's already well defined, the highlights won't be doing much. So adding that extra detail on the cheeks, on the face, the forehead, and the folds on his suit. And that's that. So we'll go ahead and do the shadows. So control, click on the new layer to add a new layer at the bottom of the guy. Change the blending mode to multiply. Then we'll just go ahead and, while holding Alt, click on a shadow or a darker area, so dark brown in this case. Ensure the flow is at 100 and you're using the soft brush tool. So as I mentioned earlier, we are going to try and match the original shadow to this cropped out guy. So the further we move away from the subject, the shadow gets lighter and disappears. And also the areas where the subject rests on the building, those areas are the darkest, so contact shadow. I'll start with the main shadow, which also, as seen in the original image, is slanting. We are not trying to be perfect here, we are just trying to create something that looks almost natural. Don't worry about the opacity, we'll fix that later. Also, as you can see, most of the shadows lay below the hand, so above there is little to no shadow. So create a layer mask, ensure black is the foreground color and the flow is at 100, then just erase the areas outside the building. There's going to be a little bit of some shadows on the lower building, so we won't erase it entirely. So reduce the flow and brush over it, ensure black is the foreground color. Okay, so there's little to no shadow above the elbow. So we'll increase the flow and get rid of this shadow protruding above his upper arm. We create a new layer, so for the contact shadow, the darker shadows or the areas where the guy rests on the building, they are the darkest. So create a new layer, ensure the blending mode is multiply. Using the same color we've used on the previous shadow, just brush under the areas where the guy rests on the building. Also, we are trying to match the original image. We'll fix the opacity later, so around the shoe area as well. Create a layer mask. We don't want it entirely black. And also get rid of the areas where the shadows falls outside the building. Also there's some light penetrating over that area. So gradually brush as you go inwards. I think it's too dark. We'll try and reduce the opacity by continuing. We'll just continue and brush over the contact shadow. Until you land on something that finally looks natural. Otherwise, your images will always look like they are floating. Just take your time. Don't worry about the back and forth. All we are trying to do is come up with a good visual that's going to appeal the masses and send the message easily. So don't worry about the back and forth. As long as your final image looks good, that's all that matters. So I'll just go ahead and edit the previous shadows. I think this looks almost perfect. Minor tweaks and we are done. Okay, so we'll group the left guy layers. So click on all of them, then Control G to create a group. Double click and rename it. And we're ready to go on to the next layer. Okay. Yeah, so we are going to add the artificial sunlight. Create a new layer on top of all the layers. Pick the soft brush tool and pick a bright color. Then ensure flow is at 100 and click once just between the guys. Now that's too small. Increase the brush size and click once. Perfect. Change the blending mode from normal to screen. And that's our artificial sunlight. Easy. So we'll do the overall editing, color grading. To do this, just press Control Shift Alt E. Control Shift Alt E to take a snapshot of all the of the artboard. So ensure it's a smart object. So go to filter, convert it to a smart object in case of future changes. Then go to camera raw filter. Most people prefer color grading using Lightroom, but Photoshop got you covered with the camera raw filters. So these are side-by-side comparison. I'll just apply the previous images, then I'll take you through it. First things first, basics. Click the basics. Then what I did, I increased the temperature. As you move to the left, it gets warmer. As you move to the right, it gets cooler. But since we wanted a warm theme in this visual, we'll go slightly to the right. So around 4 or 5 will work. Exposure, as you move towards the left, the image gets darker. As you move towards the right, it gets more exposed. So we'll increase the exposure slightly. Texture, clarity, those are just to add the sharpening, but we can leave it at 0 or 1. Any value closer to 0 will work at this point since the image is already sharp. So we're just doing some final editing and retouching. Color mixer, not really necessary. We already color matched our images, so we'll skip to color grading. Okay, so for beginners, if you don't know what highlights are the bright areas. So like the sun, the sun, or the areas where the sun rays directly fall on the subjects. The shadows are the darkest areas, and the midtones are the neutrals. So the highlights, we are going to move them towards, on the color wheel, we will move towards yellow. So on the color wheel, there's a, let's say, there's a slider. As you move it towards the edge of the color wheel, the intensity increases, but we just want to add the highlights slightly. So just 1 point from the center will work. Okay, the midtones, will give it some little bit of orange. Then on the slider, move it 1 point from the center. Then for the shadows, we'll select a shade of red. So as you can see, shadows affect the dark areas, so we pull the slider 1 point from the center. So once it's done, just click OK, and your image is good to go. So in case you'd like me to clarify on any technique I've used in this video, or you have any inquiry, just hit my DM. So this is the final output. So thank you guys for watching. Subscribe and keep creating those badass visuals. I'll keep you posted, but until then, peace.